The Princess of Wales was a new kind of royal. She carried out her duties with elegance and style, just like other members of the royal family. But there was a difference. She wasn't stuffy, responding to people naturally, and the people took her to their hearts.
The real thing about protecting somebody is information, is having that right chemistry. Her role as a princess was a role of duty. I mean, she was far more comfortable outside of that in the normality of life. And this was one of Diana's catchphrases. I just want to be normal. The problem, it was very difficult to be normal. You know, how do you be normal as a princess?
Before the eyes of the world, it seemed that the romantic schoolgirl had flowered into a serene, self-confident princess. But it was a veneer. In private, the princess was not living the fairy tale.
The press, it was relentless. You know, I was there to protect the Princess of Wales, but actually the media was part of, you know, that protection. You know, like it or not, I think ultimately they came to understand that.
The princess's popularity soon turned into adulation. A new word began to appear in the media's vocabulary, die-mania. On a trip to America, the crowds neared hysteria, screaming for the princess wherever she went.
Something I don't know, but I'll know that flew.
I couldn't believe that somebody like her could die so tragically in something as mundane as a car accident. I have been very critical publicly about the protection of her when with Dodi Fayed and under the so-called protection of Mohammed Al Fayed. I knew at that moment that the reason she died was because of a failure in her protection. My name is Ken Wharfe, formerly the protection officer Bodyguard to the late Diana, Princess of Wales, and also to the young princes William and Harry. I left Scotland Yard in 2002 and was with the Royalty Protection Department from 1986 until my departure in 2002. I began my career in the police service in 1967, and you know, was a police officer in the West End of London, and in Kensington and in North London. And it was during my time in North London in the early 80s that at the time of Margaret Thatcher's government, the mining dispute, inner city disturbances in London. I mean, policing was quite difficult. And although I, you know, had not fallen out of love with policing, I was becoming more and more disillusioned with the styles of policing. And rather fortuitously that I had a contact with the Queen's police officer at that time, a man called Jim Beaton, who I'd known at Kensington when I was there as a sergeant. And he suggested to me that I might be interested in a post that was coming up in Royalty Protection to look after the young princes William and Harry. And after a series of modular training exercises, I eventually went to meet Diana at Sandringham House in Norfolk in 1986-87. And that's where the Royalty Protection journey began. Having sort of, you know, worked for about 6 months with William and Harry, my colleague who was working with Diana at the time, sadly was diagnosed with a terminal cancer. And at that point, Diana asked me if I would work with her. Well, it wasn't a difficult choice. I said yes, of course. At that point, I started to work with Diana. And, you know, that was, you know, a real change. You know, a real change from working with two young children. And I was suddenly working with a very high-profile member of the royal family that was the subject of virtually every daily news coverage at that time in the mid-80s.
The cool conservatoire of Melbourne's music school was to prove even more testing for the royal couple, as Prince Charles met up with an old friend. Henri Touzeau, professor of cello, remembered the prince had once played the instrument. Would he like to try again? The prince suspected a setup, but he graciously agreed to blow a couple of notes. Then everyone decided it was the princess's turn, except perhaps the princess. She shifted about, looking rather reluctant, before the persuasive professor led her off to the piano, apparently her forte. Without further fuss, she dropped her bag on the floor and plunged into Rachmaninoff's complicated Concerto No. 2.
You know, there wasn't a newspaper that didn't at some time print something about Diana. Most of it, interesting enough, was positive, but there was the negative aspect of the Diana story that A, she didn't like, and I dare say a lot of people didn't like either, but it was a different role, but a fantastic opportunity. I mean, personally, I was able to travel places in the world that I've never been able to travel before.
This was the first trip on Concorde for the princess, though at subsonic speeds only, just a short hop to Vienna via Milan to pick up the prince, who'd been on a painting holiday, despite his broken finger, which is still giving him some pain. Her problem was the chill wind that blows from Eastern Europe, bad for hats with brims. They were greeted by President Kirchschläger, just as if this were an official visit rather than a trip to give a necessary boost to British trade in Vienna.
That was great, but actually it was a real privilege working with someone like that. And Diana was different from most members of the royal family in that, you know, she was far more closer, I think, to her staff than the most members of the British royal family were at that particular time. I think things have changed slightly.
Sorry, I didn't see you
I
there.
wish you
Sorry.
that, darling.
You're hanging the lamp.
I'm happy with that. I'm having it all this side. You look
So are you on your way shopping? I see the sun out.
I think for anyone that's meeting royalty for the first time, it's can be quite difficult. I mean, it was a privilege, certainly, and an honour, but quite nerve-breaking at the same time. But I was shown into this room at Sandringham House by a very over-attentive butler. And as I walked into this room, there was Diana sat on a sofa. William, aged 5, was attempting to play a piano, let's put it like that. And Harry, aged 3, was stood on a small coffee table, destamenizing this vase of royal lilies. And I didn't say anything. The butler said, "Oh, this is Inspector Wharfe from London." And she said, "I don't envy you, looking after my children. They can be a ruddy nuisance." And I was about to say something, at which point William turned round off this piano stool and said, in a sort of this just William way, "No, I'm not a ruddy nuisance." And Harry sort of chuckled in on the back of that. And at which point he falls off this table, and the vase of flowers falls off this table. And I'm thinking, God, what's happening here? At which point Diana says, "Come here, both of you." And they got off and run out, pursued by their mother. And I haven't said a thing. And literally minutes later, Diana reappears and says, "Look, I'm so sorry about that. This is what I'm saying. I don't envy you looking after my children." But that was actually quite an interesting break of the ice, because that set the scene really to what, Diana was like. The normality of this situation was something that was so far out of my mind. I didn't think for one moment something like this would happen within a royal palace. And I think it was symptomatic, really, of what Diana was like. And for the next 8 years when I worked with her, it was, very much in that relaxed way, both professionally and privately. the first ever engagement that I did with Diana was a holiday in Mallorca, or her holiday certainly, with guests of the King and Queen of Spain in Palma, Mallorca, with the Prince of Wales and the young Princes William and Harry. And I just started, this is my first time working with Diana in a sense. And although I was staying in a nearby hotel outside the Maravint Palace, and then suddenly I get a phone call, I think the second day I was there, to see her in the palace. And I went up there and we sat outside near a swimming pool because everyone else had disappeared, except the Queen of Spain on the King's yacht and gone off for the day. So I'm thinking, God, what am I doing up here? Anyway, at that point, Diana said, look, I thought it would be a good opportunity for me to tell you more about me, about where I sit within this family, and also where my relationship with my husband and my relationship with a man named James Hewitt. And I'm thinking, hey, what am I doing here? I know this anyway, but why do I need you to tell me this? But actually, it was quite an extraordinary moment, because although I'd known about the things we talked about, I think it made me understand her a great deal more than I did at that particular time. And, at least there was a communication between she and I at this point, which always bodes well for protecting somebody. Because people in the protection industry have this sort of idea that you've got to be 6'4", physically fit, can shoot, left and right hand, all this sort of nonsense, and run a mile in under whatever it is. But actually that isn't the case. The real thing about protecting somebody is information, is having that right chemistry, is making it work as a professional relationship whereby you can accrue all this information to put in place so there isn't a problem. And that's what it was now working with Diana. She was a great supplier of information. So we knew, my team and I knew exactly what we were about to do because we had a great deal of advance warning about it. And so, that meeting that day was actually very rewarding for me, and I think possibly for her as well. Yeah, James Hewitt was in a relationship with Diana for a relatively short period of time.
I have no comment. No comment, I'm afraid.
Will you be prepared to make a comment to us later on in the day?
No, I have no comment.
Diana herself admitted it, on the Panorama program.
Did your relationship go beyond a close friendship?
Yes, it did. Yes.
Were you unfaithful?
Yes, I adored him. Yes, I was in love with him. But I was very let down.
He understood the difficulties of being in a relationship with the Princess of Wales, and what the likely fallout could be. Yeah, I was mindful of that, but I was more concerned about the safety of her. So and to a lesser extent him, but again, it was important in order to me to give the best protection to her, was not to be an enemy of him or for me to be difficult with him, because then who knows what might have happened. But actually, he was a very likable character. I got on very well with him. And, for the period of time that I was working with Diana and him, her security was never compromised, which was due entirely to her being honest about where we were going, when we were going, and equally with him, asking and saying to me, what can I do, Ken, to help you, and so forth. So, the moral issues of that relationship, was not for me to judge, but, it had to be that way. And, why try and make something unhappy out of that particular time was something that was important for her. That relationship was important for a while. It was never, in my view, going to be long-lasting, which it wasn't. But no, it was part of the job that I never anticipated would happen, but it did. But sadly, it wouldn't last. But I think Diana knew that. I'm not so certain that James Hewitt did. But life moves on.
the world a perfect match. They seemed totally at ease together in public, and the prince was never slow to sing his wife's praises.
At that time, everybody was saying, good luck, and I hope everything goes well, and how lucky you are to be engaged to such a lovely lady. And my goodness, I was lucky enough to marry her. And we had many, many messages. It's amazing what ladies do when your back's turned.
Whenever there was a joint engagement, it would have been the responsibility of the prince's detective to be there. He, on this occasion, was working elsewhere, I believe. I may have been professional, but he asked me to do it, which I said, yes, of course, I would do. And I was actually surprised that even Diana had agreed to go to this party, knowing full well that Camilla was going to be there. But anyway, she decided to go. And in this particular event, that I remember opening the door, and all the assembled guests were inside, and it was like sort of freezing a movie frame, you know, when suddenly people just stopped because, you know, Diana was radiant, you know, looked fantastic, you know, because she always did. And then, you know, you look across the floor and, you know, there were certain individuals that were radiant, but, you know, it's a very difficult act to sort of top. An hour later, I heard my name being called, and it was her. And she said, I can't find my husband, or Camilla can. So I said, what do you want to do? And she said, well, I'm going to go and find them. And we went and found them. They were in a sort of basement area, and they were sat on a sofa talking. And I didn't know what Diana was going to say next, but she literally went up to Camilla and said, stop treating me like an idiot. I know exactly what's going on, or words very close to that effect. And then Camilla said this phrase, which I'll never forget. She said, well, it's okay for you. You know, you've got two wonderful boys. And I could see the prince would be very uncomfortable in this situation, as indeed I was. And I started to move away, and Diana said, no, stay there, stay there. And there were other exchanges, but, you know, they weren't aggressive. But I think that was the turning point, really, of the relationship, because, you know, soon thereafter, I think Diana had then given up any hope of a reconciliation. Because I think, to be honest, I think she firmly believed that something, you know, like a return to normality within her marriage could happen. I think she really held out hope that that might happen. But I think this meeting, I think, probably scotched it. I think she realized then that there's little or no chance of us returning to a normal married life. And thereafter, of course, you know, the announcement by John Major was made in the House of Parliament, and it moves on to the next stage in their life.
A crisis might be triggered up by the breakup of a marriage, the loss or change of a job, or the trial of an accident or bereavement. Added to such troubles is the stigma of being labelled mentally ill. The fear of gaining such a label may also prevent sufferers from seeking help at an early stage in case they begin an irreversible slide to institutional dependence.
She also boosted the morale of the soldiers serving in Northern Ireland. She went to Londonderry to visit the Royal Hampshire Regiment, one of the regiments of which she was Colonel-in-Chief. Even in full combat gear, the princess managed to look glamorous, providing a welcome relief for the men used to the daily dangers of serving in the troubled province. Although an obvious target herself, the princess seemed to shrug off any fears.
Well, planning a royal event, an overseas visit, it takes a lot of planning. Of course it does. And there's always a reconnaissance. Let's take Pakistan as an example. A major solo visit by Diana. So there would initially be a liaison with the Pakistan embassy in London to sort out visas and stuff like that. And then we'd contact the embassy or the High Commission in Islamabad. So we'd go to Islamabad with the private secretary. We'd see the chief of police. We'd speak to local dignitaries to formulate a plan, a structure, and then that we would come back, work out what police involvements we needed, what security. We'd get checks from Central Security, MI5, MI6, to find out if there's a reason why we shouldn't go to Pakistan, where we were going to stay. In this particular case, we'd stay in the High Commission, and that was a safe compound, as you would imagine. This would go back. The private secretary would draw up a program. I would draw up a security program, submit that to the commissioner. The plan for him would go to Diana, go to the Queen. They would sign it off. It sounds simple, but they were fairly complicated. You know, in Pakistan, it was quite difficult because the police were quite brutal in the sense they were quite, you know, they were quite handy with their staves and their sticks. And I remember, actually, it was in, somewhere in Pakistan, it wasn't in Islamabad, but in one town visit, there were literally thousands of people that lined the highways. And there were no barriers because the police didn't have that equipment. And of course, I remember these police officers on sort of Bantam 125 motorcycles, you know, were our escort. And the civil police have these batons and they sort of knock people's legs, you see. And Diana said to me one day, she said, "Ken, can you stop them hitting the people?" I said, "Well, I'll try, but, you know, that's what it's like." And I, you know, said to this guy, I said, "Look, can you stop hitting people?" And he looked at me and said, "Well, hang on, you telling me to do my job, this is how we work it." So nobody complained, anyway, that's how it was. But luckily nothing went wrong, so. But it was a different style of policing, but that happens, you know. On trips like that are very well planned, you know, and things move like clockwork, it moves too fast for there to be a problem, to be honest. You're more likely to get something go wrong in a private capacity where you don't sort of have that comfort of support. I cannot remember any incident on a sort of official visit that we had a problem with.
I haven't yet worked out a method of splitting my wife in half. She can do both sides.
Every tour was memorable for me, every single one of them. I suppose if I had to pick one out, it would be a private journey that Diana made to Verona in Italy. And the purpose of the visit was to go and see the great Pavarotti sing in Verdi's Requiem. And I love both popular and classical music, so for me, this was a real bonus. And we managed to get out to Lake Garda without anybody knowing, which was surprising. And the night of the concert, the great man himself came out. And then within minutes, there was this almighty, I say almighty, thunderstorm. And, you know, it was a sort of rain of stair rods and claps of thunder and lightning. It was like the end of the world. And suddenly a steward had came across with this sheet of white tarpaulin, because it was open. It was at the amphitheatre in Verona. So there was the princess, myself, her mother, and a few others all sat underneath this tarpaulin in the hope that the rain would subside and the concert would begin. But it never did. It was probably one of the first times or second time in the history of these concerts that the concert was cancelled. So what do we do now? Well, Diana said, "Why don't we go to Venice?" We set off. We drove to Venice, and literally 2 hours later, we arrive at this police station by the canal, which was seriously under 2 foot of water. And we got out and walked across St. Mark's Square, got into a police launch, and then for the next hour chugged along the Grand Canal. under the bridge of Sighs and then came back, and my colleague had managed to commandeer some bread or some croissant, I remember, and probably more important, 2 bottles of Pinot Grigio. And then we were chugging around. There was a sort of some respite in the weather. And nobody knew about this. But for me, I mean, that was an incredible journey. Seeing the great Pavarotti, Verona, and then walking around St. Mark's Square and Venice at midnight, you know, with the Princess of Wales, her mother and friends, and nobody knew who they were, who we were, and when we got back, no pictures or anything in the press. So a bit of a first, really. I was very fortunate to go with Diana to Richard Branson's island, Necker Island in the British Virgin Islands. But literally half a mile across the lagoon at Byrus Creek were 60 to 70 of the world's press, media, paparazzi, whatever you want to phrase it. And she said, I'm not giving any photo calls, Ken. I'm not doing anything. The manager from the island, he said, I've got some gifts for the children. I said, oh, what's that? He said, I've got a couple of catapults. These were these massive, great elastic catapults that you tie to 2 trees. And he had this sort of bag of balloons that you fill with water. And I thought, oh, maybe great for the kids. They can sort of have target competitions. William heard all this, and he came up to me. He said, Ken, he said, I've got a very good idea. I said, what's that? He said, well, when Mummy has to give a press opportunity, Harry and me and my cousins, we can be on the cliff top and we can fire the balloons at the press. So I got on my boat straight over to Byrus Creek, and then there spoke to the late James Whittaker of the Daily Mirror, a formidable character. So he coordinated the event, and I said, you've got 15 minutes off the shore, Diana will be there with the kids on the beach with the buckets and spades. That's it. When that is all over, not a problem. So the following day, this flotilla of small boats arrive. And they were delighted, of course. You know, some of the best shots of Diana that ever came out in the sort of leopard skin costume, etc. And there they were, you know, assembled in this flotilla. And all was going well until suddenly, you know, I heard this word, fire, from the cliff tops. And there Harry and his friends released this salvo of watercolored balloons that landed right in the center of this flotilla of cameramen who incidentally found it incredibly amusing. And one of the balloons hit Whittaker. And of course, that was his pièce de résistance, because he then shouts up something, I've just been flayed by the future King of England. And of course, everybody started laughing on Diana on the beach, her mother, her sisters, her brother. It was an incredible experience, all because of William's idea. There was one occasion when I just returned from my aunt in Dorset, and I always used to go and walk on Studland Bay Beach. And she said, well, I'd love to do that, but you know, I can't. Well, I said, you never asked. She said, well, let's do it then. And I said, okay, well, let's do it. Well, when are we going to do it? You know, because otherwise, if we don't do it now, you'll say, oh, well, you said that, we never do it, usually. And she said, well, we could do it Thursday. I said, okay. I never told anybody. We took, I remember it was a Ford Mondeo. We drove out of her garage, and we drove down to Poole Harbour, got on the chain ferry across Poole Harbour to Studland Bay, and she had this Michael Jackson jacket, that's what I remember. And I gave her a radio, and I said, look, if you just walk off there, I'll be round by the other side. If there's a problem, just, you know, call me on the radio. So I then drove the car up to a car park by a pub called the Banks Arms. I've never forgotten it. There was a risk element here, of course there was, but, you know, there is in life anyway. And you know, nothing can be so pre-planned that's perfect. I mean, I knew that from day one I took this job on. And I much rather work in those sort of parameters of risk, actually. It's quite exciting. But anyway, Diana walked off. I drove up to the Banks Arms car park and sat on the beach. And anyway, about half an hour later, my radio crackles into life, and it's Diana. I said, "Are you okay?" And she was laughing. And I said, "Well, you sound as though you're having a good time," which is great. She said, "Yes." She said, "But you never told me about the nudist beach." And I didn't remember it. And she'd stumbled across, you know, a half a dozen septuagenarian males, you know, walking in and out of this beautiful sea at Studland Bay. And they hadn't got a clue that the woman with the Michael Jackson jacket was actually the Princess of Wales. But her character and her sense of humour certainly made my life a lot easier, and it made those working around her a lot easier too, because she was actually quite a fun person to work with.
When I started my public life 12 years ago, I understood the media might be interested in what I did. I realised then their attention would inevitably focus on both our private and public lives. But I was not aware of how overwhelming that attention would become, nor the extent to which it would affect both my public duties and my personal life in a manner that's been hard to bear.
I left in 1993, a year following the separation from the Prince of Wales, so she was clearly down the track of moving out of royalty. I knew that. Not many people did, but she was about to leave. I'd been, you know, in discussions with Tony Blair, the Prime Minister, and before that, John Major, about a possible role for her in a new life. And nobody really knew what that was going to be. And 93 was a very difficult time for her in terms of what am I going to do next? And I could understand that because, you know, you're reaching a point in your life where things are to change dramatically. To move away from being a working princess to starting a new role was difficult.
You're surprised at the political furore that developed as a result of your visit to England?
I saw it merely as a distraction because I'm not a political figure. I am a humanitarian figure, and always have been and always will be.
We will concentrate, of course, on dissemination.
It's been a very intensive 4 days. I have seen a great deal. I've seen the people affected by landmines. I've seen the landmines themselves. Angola is an example of what the Red Cross can achieve around the world, given the sort of cooperation that we have seen that exists between the Red Cross and the NGOs and the Angolan authorities.
And, you know, times were difficult for her. I remember we went on holiday, well, she went on holiday to the Nassau and to Nevis and had great holidays that year. But I'd noticed a change in Diana. It wasn't the Diana that I'd known for the last 6, 7 years. So we went away, we came back in the car, and she said, I need to go to Tower Records in Ken High Street. She said, you can park the car. I said, hang on a minute. I said, well, I remember saying, I said, what's up with you? You know, so it was like a domestic argument. I said, you know, we'll go and drop the car somewhere, whatever. No, you can park the car. I said, no, I'm not doing that. What we'll do is we'll park outside the embassy in Kensington Palace Gardens. And she drove there and parked outside. And there was the police there, because that was where the embassy was. And she then ran up Kensington Palace Gardens. About a day later, I thought about this. I thought, no, this is time to go, I think. And at that point, I did. I didn't know that in October, November, that 4 weeks later, she abandoned the entire security. But I went back before that moment. And this is quite interesting because I went back to Kensington Palace. She insisted I go back to see her, which I did. And it was like nothing had happened. You know, it's just like going that first day when I met her in Sandringham. The usual sort of joke-telling session started, you know, happy times, fun, laughter. It was really good. I mean, I was thinking, you know, maybe I shouldn't have gone, you know, maybe I would come back. And, but no, and then at the end she said, is there any piece of advice you could give me? There's only one piece of advice that I could give, and that's, look, whilst our security and whilst having us around you has sometimes been invasive, and I accept that, we've allowed you some privacy, and, you know, we've had fun at the same time, and, you know, that's how it is. So I don't know what you're going to do, but look, whatever you do, whether you work anywhere in the world, another country, you will always be Diana, the Princess of Wales, you know, Her Royal Highness, whatever. I mean, you know, and I jokingly said, if you change sex, you know, you're still going to need protection, you know, for your own safety. It is, you know, that's what it is. Sadly, she didn't listen. And I think that decision on her part ultimately led to her tragic death in Paris in 1997.
Charles.
Shut up.
Charles.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Sorry. William. William.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Oh.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
William,
we love you.
Love you.
I couldn't believe that somebody like her could die so tragically in something as mundane as a car accident. I was renovating an older property in Dorset. I had no telephone, no mobile phone. It was the era of the pager. And at about 1 o'clock in the morning, this pager danced across the wooden floorboards where I was sleeping. And it actually said, you know, ring my office urgently. So I literally had to walk up to the phone box in the village because I didn't have a phone. And I spoke to Chief Superintendent at my office. And he said, thanks for calling. He said, got some bad news. I said, oh, I bet it is. And he said, no, your boss has died in Paris. Well, why is he telling me the commissioner of police has died in Paris? I couldn't work it out. I said that to him. He said, no. He said, the Princess of Wales has been killed in a car crash in Paris. Then it did sink in. And my immediate reaction was, well, that's impossible. You know, if you can't die in a car crash, you know, no, I just couldn't believe it. He said, well, you have to believe it. But deep down, I then reflected upon that conversation I had with her at Kensington Palace about the protection, because, you know, I knew at that moment that the reason she died was because of a failure in her protection. And this moves on to perhaps a very big issue with me. I have been very critical publicly about the protection of her when with Dodi Fayed and under the so-called protection of Mohammed Al Fayed, because I feel quite strongly about it. And I have been critical of the bodyguards, Rhys Jones and Wingfield, and I've never spoken to them. I'm only critical of what happened and what I see as failures of their protection. That is a tragic accident, as I said, that could and should have been avoided. End of story. Then I was part of a team that was coordinating the funeral. And my particular role was, I was the liaison coordinator for the internal security at Westminster Abbey.
She was an exceptional and gifted human being. In good times and bad, she never lost her capacity to smile and laugh, nor to inspire others with her warmth and kindness. I admired and respected her for her energy and commitment to others, and especially for her devotion to her 2 boys. I, for one, believe there are lessons to be drawn from her life and from the extraordinary and moving reaction to her death. I share in your determination to cherish her memory. I hope that tomorrow we can all, wherever we are, join in expressing our grief at Diana's loss and gratitude for her all too short life.
Of all the ironies about Diana, perhaps the greatest was this. A girl given the name of the ancient goddess of hunting was, in the end, the most hunted person of the modern age.
It was an extraordinary event. For me, the eulogy given by her brother, Charles Spencer, was incredibly powerful. It didn't hold back at all about the role of the monarchy and the criticism he had for the royal family and the media. And this was being relayed outside. So, you know, what I remember was this, it was like a sort of dry leaves falling on a sort of corrugated tin roof. But it was actually the clapping outside of people that were applauding Spencer for what he was saying. It must have been very difficult for the Queen and other members of the royal family to listen to this.
She would want us today to pledge ourselves to protecting her beloved boys, William and Harry, from a similar fate. And I do this here, Diana, on your behalf. We will not allow them to suffer the anguish that used regularly to drive you to tearful despair. William and Harry, we all care desperately for you today. We're all chewed up with sadness at the loss of a woman who wasn't even our mother. How great your suffering is, we cannot even imagine. Above all, we give thanks for the life of a woman I'm so proud to be able to call my sister. The unique, the complex, the extraordinary and irreplaceable Diana, whose beauty, both internal and external, will never be extinguished from our minds.
My abiding memory of working for the royal family was a very positive one. I enjoyed it. I was indeed very privileged. I'm not critical. I think working with the royal family, certainly working with the Prince and Princess of Wales, that you are sort of dropped into this royal box of magic. And, you know, you wander around it and you actually start to see how all these tricks work. What will Diana be remembered for? A question that a lot of people ask. And the very fact that we're talking about her now, 25 years after her death, I think she'll be remembered for her practicalities of dealing with life, really, and the impact that she had on ordinary people. So I think there are changes afoot that will see the monarchy move in a new direction. But I firmly believe that the program of modernisation, and there'll be those that disagree with me, that began really during the sort of very short Diana period. Even as a non-working member of the royal in the latter stages of her life, she'll always be remembered for her work and her program of modernisation, this sort of getting in touch with people, and her program against government advice of getting involved in the landsmines crusade in Angola and Mozambique. It was very important for people to remember that. And I think that's why people to this day still remember and talk about Diana, because of the way that she began a change at the beginning of how we perceive the royal family to be. And I think in her two sons, certainly William, more so now than Harry because of his situation, sees a direction very much akin to that of his mother. So I think she'll be remembered for her ability and her sense of humour, her friendly character, there's no doubt about that, and her generosity.